All right, so you wanted like the real deal on Ujjivan's small finance bank's latest quarterly results. We're going to take a deep dive into how they did this time around. We've got board meeting outcomes, a press release, even their whole investor presentation, like the whole shebang.
Yeah, so we're really trying to see if their goal to become, a universal bank is actually happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty fascinating to me how these latest results show that change, like, happening right in front of us.
Uh-huh.
For example, their loan book, it grew by 10%
Okay.
year over year, ended up at 30,466 crore.
Wow.
That's solid growth.
Yeah, definitely.
But when you look a little closer, there's a little dip compared to last quarter.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that dip. What's the story there? Is that like a warning sign?
Well, it's not necessarily like a huge red flag or anything.
Uh-huh.
The total growth, that number by itself doesn't really tell the whole story.
Right.
The real story is how that loan book is growing.
Oh, okay.
Ujjivan is moving more towards secured loans.
Okay.
Think like mortgages and vehicle loans.
Yeah. Right, those lower risk ones?
Exactly. And those now make up a pretty big chunk, like 39% of their total loans.
Wow.
And that segment alone jumped by 52% year over year.
Oh, wow. So they're really going for it.
Yeah.
It seems like they're playing it a little safer, as they're trying to attract more customers, like a wider range of customers. Like you would expect for a bank that's aiming to become like a universal bank, right?
Right.
Makes sense, but isn't that kind of different from what they've been doing?
Right.
I mean, like their roots are in microfinance, right?
Yeah.
Like they're known for serving those underserved community.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's true they built their rep on microfinance,
Mm-hmm.
and that whole sector has been facing some problems lately,
Right.
especially with those new Guardrail 1.0 regulations.
Yeah, I remember reading about those.
So essentially, these guardrails limit how much someone can borrow
Right.
from different lenders.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to protect people from having too much debt.
Gotcha. So how is Ujjivan handling that shift? I mean, their CEO did mention green shoots in microfinance,
Right.
and they're saying their collection rates are better now, reaching 99.3% in December.
Yeah, especially for those group and individual loans.
Right.
What's really interesting is that they're actually doing better than the rest of the industry
Wow.
when it comes to asset quality,
Okay.
particularly in those top 5 states that make up most of their portfolio, like 60%.
Oh, wow. So they're really focused there.
Yeah, and they're even lowering interest rates on those microfinance loans.
Wait, really? Lowering them? Wouldn't that hurt their profits? Especially with their credit costs going up?
That's where their strategy gets really interesting.
Okay.
It's not just about playing it safe with those secured loans.
Uh-huh.
They're using those lower microfinance rates to attract more reliable borrowers.
Oh, so they're trying to get better quality borrowers that way?
Exactly. They're improving the quality of that part of their loan book.
That's smart. But is that enough to like balance out the profit squeeze?
Well, they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Okay, good.
They're pushing growth in other areas too.
Uh-huh.
If you look at their investor presentation, you can see they're really increasing those affordable housing loans.
Oh, interesting.
And they're seeing some good traction with new products like vehicle and gold loans.
Okay, so they're branching out a bit.
Right. For a universal bank, it's all about diversification,
Yeah.
not relying too much on any one product or customer.
Right. That makes sense. So they're lending more carefully, they're expanding into new areas. What about getting deposits? I mean, that's super important for any bank, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ujjivan said their deposits grew by 16% year over year.
Okay.
Their cash ratio is sitting at a decent 25.1%.
Right.
And those retail term deposits are growing too. What do you think about all that?
Attracting deposits is super important,
Uh-huh.
especially if they're really serious about becoming a universal bank.
Right?
They got their AD1 license a while back,
Okay.
which lets them offer a wider range of deposit products.
So they have more options now?
Yeah. And now they're going after those wealthier customers,
Okay.
diversifying their funding sources.
They're really shaking things up.
Yeah.
It seems like they're doing a lot of things, right? They're lending more, they're diversifying their loans, they're attracting more deposits. But what about their bottom line? I mean, their net profit dropped by 64% year over year. It ended up at 109 crore.
Wow.
That's a big drop. Should we be worried?
It's definitely worth looking at,
Okay.
but I wouldn't panic just yet.
Okay.
Those increased credit costs we talked about earlier played a part.
Right.
Plus, they decided to put aside an extra 30 crore as a provision.
Okay, so like a safety net.
Yeah, basically a buffer, just
Yeah.
in case some of those loans go bad.
So it was kind of rough quarter,
Yeah,
but not like a total disaster.
exactly. They still have a healthy capital adequacy ratio at 23.9%.
Okay.
which means they have enough cushion to handle potential losses.
That's good.
And their provision coverage ratio is at 80%, which is really strong.
Wow.
Basically, they're being careful and building up their defenses.
Yeah.
Which is actually a good sign for their long-term stability.
Okay, so they're thinking ahead.
Yeah.
That's reassuring. But what about their digital stuff? Everyone's talking about digital transformation these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Ujjivan is promoting their Hello Ujjivan app.
Right.
And they're talking a lot about their phygital approach, like blending the physical and digital worlds.
Right.
Are these just buzzwords, or are these initiatives actually making a difference?
It's more than just buzzwords.
Okay.
Digital transformation is super important for any bank these days.
Yeah.
If they want to stay competitive and reach those tech-savvy customers.
Right.
What's interesting about Ujjivan is they're not just going all in on digital.
Okay.
They're acknowledging that a lot of their customers, especially in those semi-urban and rural areas, still really value that face-to-face interaction.
So they're trying to cater to both.
Exactly.
Those who are digitally savvy and those who prefer a more traditional banking experience.
Right.
That's a tough balancing act.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And we'll have to see how well they execute this phygital strategy.
Right, how they make it all work.
Yeah.
So they're juggling a lot. Diversifying loans, attracting deposits, managing risk, embracing digital. It's a lot to keep track of.
It definitely is. And that's why it's so important to look beyond just the numbers themselves and really understand the strategy behind them.
Okay, so the why behind the what.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what we're doing here. But there's still so much more to unpack, especially how all of this fits into their big plan to become a universal bank.
Right. That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. Can they actually pull it off?
We'll dive into that and more after a quick break.
Sounds good.
It's interesting, though. Ujjivan's not the only one doing this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're seeing a bunch of small finance banks in India wanting to become universal banks.
Oh, so like a trend.
Yeah, like a whole wave.
Okay, but wouldn't that mean more competition?
Right.
Especially from those big banks that are already out there.
For sure. Competition is definitely heating up.
Yeah.
But Ujjivan might have something special.
Okay.
They really understand that underserved segment.
Right.
They built their business on serving those communities that the big banks kind of ignored.
Yeah.
And that experience could really help them as they grow.
That makes sense. They've already built those relationships.
Right.
And they have that trust from working with those customers for years.
Exactly.
But let's talk about their profitability.
Right.
Their net profit took a hit this quarter.
Yeah.
They said it was because of increased credit costs and that extra provision they set aside. So is this just a temporary thing? Or is it a sign of bigger problems?
It's a good question.
Right.
Especially for investors who are watching the bottom line.
Right.
Those increased credit costs are partly because they're getting into riskier loans.
Okay.
Like those unsecured individual loans we talked about. Those loans tend to have higher default rates.
Right.
Especially when the economy's not doing so great.
So higher risk, higher reward, but also higher chance of things going wrong.
Right.
How are they managing that risk? I mean, a 64% drop in profit is a lot.
They're not just being reckless.
Okay, good.
They've actually made their lending standards stricter for those unsecured loans.
Okay.
They're using data analytics to check if borrowers can actually pay back the loans.
Oh, so like looking at patterns and stuff.
Right. And they're building up their provision coverage ratio.
Okay.
It's like an emergency fund.
Oh, I see.
Just in case things don't go as planned.
So they're being proactive.
Right.
Not just ignoring the problem.
Exactly. It shows they know the risks and they're trying to minimize them.
Okay, that's good.
But remember, they're also growing.
Right.
They're making investments that might affect profits now, but could pay off later.
Right. So short-term pain for long-term gain.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
You have to spend money on a solid foundation first.
Makes sense. So a long-term perspective is important here.
Yeah.
But can they actually make sustainable profits while growing so much? They're expanding into new markets, investing in technology, all while trying to control those credit costs.
It's a tricky balance.
Yeah.
A lot depends on how well they manage those risks.
Right.
Keep their expenses down and attract those deposits we talked about.
Right, because those stable, low-cost deposits are key for a bank.
They're like gold.
Okay.
They give them the money to lend without having to pay a lot of interest.
Because if they have to borrow a lot at high interest rates, that'll eat into their profits.
Exactly. So deposits are super important.
Got it. Let's go back to those vulnerable regions we talked about.
Okay.
Those states with a lot of borrowers who have multiple loans.
Right.
That sounds kind of risky.
It's definitely something to watch.
Yeah.
Those loans tend to have higher default rates,
Right.
which could hurt Ujjivan's asset quality,
Uh-huh.
especially if the economy gets worse or those guardrail regulations start to have a bigger impact.
So it's like a potential problem even though their asset quality looks okay right now?
It's something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so what should I be thinking about? Should I be worried?
It's not about being scared,
Yeah.
but more about staying informed.
Yeah.
What Ujjivan needs to do is really monitor those regions,
Right.
adjust their lending practices, and maybe even find ways to help those borrowers manage their debt better.
Okay, so be proactive.
Exactly.
So manage risk, keep an eye on expenses, navigate those vulnerable regions. Anything else we should be watching for?
Well, their success in attracting and keeping customers in these new markets is really important.
Yeah.
They need to offer products and services that are competitive,
Okay.
maybe even a little disruptive,
Yeah.
and they need to create a smooth experience,
Oh,
especially with that phygital model.
right, because customer loyalty is huge in banking these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are so many options now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where their digital transformation efforts could really shine.
Right.
That Hello Ujjivan app and their focus on data analytics.
Exactly. Imagine if they could personalize their offerings,
Okay.
figure out what customers need before they even ask.
That would be amazing.
It would be a game changer.
So it's not just about using technology for the sake of using it. It's
Yes.
about using it strategically to improve the customer experience
Yeah,
and ultimately to grow the business.
exactly. Which brings us back to their universal banking goals.
Right.
It's a big vision,
Mm-hmm.
but how they do it is what matters.
Uh-huh.
They're up against some tough competition,
Right.
dealing with a lot of regulations,
Mm.
and they have to stay profitable while expanding into new and sometimes riskier areas.
So a lot on their plate.
Yeah.
But we've only just started talking about this. There's
Huh.
so much more to explore,
Yeah.
especially how Ujjivan's story fits into the bigger picture of what's happening in India's financial world.
Exactly. That's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
We're seeing a shift toward digital banking, a push for more financial inclusion and more competition from both traditional banks and those new fintech companies.
So Ujjivan's trying to make it in this changing world.
Right.
They're kind of stuck between two worlds, like you said. Those microfinance routes and this whole new thing of universal banking, that's going to be tough to manage.
It is. It's kind of like being a tightrope walker,
Right.
trying to balance while juggling a bunch of stuff. You can't let anything drop.
Ujjivan needs to keep doing what they're known for, helping those underserved communities. That's
Yeah.
like their core. But they can't ignore the opportunity of serving more customers either.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what kind of decisions should we be watching for as they're trying to do this whole balancing act?
Okay, so first, keep an eye on how they're managing their loans.
Okay.
Remember, they're moving more towards secured loans, like
Okay.
mortgages and vehicle loans.
Ah.
But they're also trying to keep their microfinance business going,
Right.
like a recipe. You need the right amount of each ingredient.
Right. Too much of one thing could ruin the whole dish. Exactly.
Yeah.
If they go too crazy with those riskier unsecured loans, they could be in trouble,
Yeah.
especially if the economy goes down.
Yeah.
But if they only focus on those safer secured loans, they might miss out on bigger profits that come with unsecured lending.
Right. It's all about finding that balance. What
Yeah.
about deposits? We talked about how important those are.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those stable, low-cost deposits.
Right.
They need those to grow and keep their interest costs down.
It's harder than ever to get deposits these days.
Really?
Yeah, all the banks are fighting for customers' money.
Oh, wow.
Ujjivan needs to offer something good,
Okay.
like competitive interest rates, convenient digital services, and that personal touch that makes people feel valued.
Because nowadays, customers have so many options.
Right.
It's not like you have to go to your local branch anymore.
Nope. You can bank from your phone, your computer,
Yeah.
even your watch.
Crazy. So that brings us back to Ujjivan's digital stuff.
Right.
That Hello Ujjivan app data analytics and their phygital approach.
Yeah, they're trying to make it all work together.
So it's not just about using technology because it's cool.
No.
It's about using it to make banking better,
Right.
more convenient, more personalized,
Right.
and ultimately to attract more customers.
You got it. But digital transformation isn't a magic solution.
Okay.
It requires changing the way you think,
Mm-hmm.
being open to new ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes time, money, and some trial and error.
So they can mess it up if they're not careful.
Definitely. But if they get it right,
Yeah.
their digital stuff could really help them stand out.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to tailor loan offers to each person, knowing what customers want before they even ask.
Yeah.
and even stopping fraud before it happens.
That would be incredible.
That's the power of data and technology.
So they're trying to do a lot, managing loans, getting deposits, embracing digital transformation, all while trying to stay profitable. That's a lot.
It is. And all this is happening in a banking sector that's always changing and sometimes unpredictable.
Yeah.
They're competing with big banks and small fintech companies, dealing with new regulations, and the economy could change at any moment.
So a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities.
Exactly. That's what makes it so interesting. Ujjivan's journey is like a mini version of what's happening in India's financial world right now. It's a story of ambition, adapting, and pushing the limits.
We've covered a lot today, from Ujjivan's performance to the bigger trends in banking. So what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they follow Ujjivan's story?
There's no easy answer. No one knows the future for sure. But we've given you the tools to understand what will make or break Ujjivan. Pay attention to how they handle risk, how they get and keep customers, how well they embrace technology, and most importantly, how they stick to their mission of financial inclusion while going after those big goals.
Stay informed, stay curious, and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. That's what makes a good customer and investor.
Absolutely. And remember, we've only scratched the surface. If you want to go deeper, check out Ujjivan's full investor presentation. It's linked in the show notes. And if you have any questions or thoughts, hit us up on social media. We love to dive deep.
Great. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time, happy exploring.